it's crazy, but it's
You're watching Channel Z, the world's leading zombie apocalypse channel, broadcasting live from Studio Z.
makes me act the way I do.
Hello and welcome. Oh my God. All right, we're experiencing some technical difficulties. Hello and welcome to Unreal World, Episode 3, live from the Barker Bunker in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm your host, Carl Flink, and I will be talking today with JoAnna Mendl from the Equus Projects based in New York City. We'll be talking about animal listening and interspecies collaborations. For a number of years, Black Label Movement has collaborated with Jo and the Equus Projects on interspecies work with horses. So let's bring on Jo Shaw now. Hey, Jo, how are you doing today?
Hey, Carl, thanks for inviting me.
It's great to see you. So I'm sure our audience is very quickly wondering just what is the Equus Project and how did you find yourself there? You've been doing this work with horses for a number of years, but that was a big transition because you used to be a human-to-human choreographer primarily.
Right. Well, I still am, but I got very seduced about 24 years ago. I did a project. I was invited to do a site-specific work for my alma mater, and they have a wonderful dance program and an equestrian program. And I said, could I put dancers with horses? I was not one of those teenagers that hung out at a barn. I hadn't ridden very much, but I loved the athleticism and the grace of these amazing animals. They're so beautiful. And I managed to make 3 large performance pieces and realized that the horses were actually attaching themselves to the dancers, in part because dancers are trained to physically listen to other moving bodies. They were sponging the energy of the horses, and they were literally becoming part of their herd. Horses really respond to what in the horse world is called mirroring. I prefer to call it sponging, which is an energetic joining. And the riders who owned these horses said, how did you get them to trot? You know, Naomi would begin to jog and the horse would be just right there with her. I was fascinated. I went back to New York and found some collaborators, a wonderful group of equestrians and some very willing and courageous dancers. And we began investigating. And it was a fascinating story. We were actually taken under the wing of some very famous natural horsemanship cowboys and scholarshiped all our ground skill training, which means how do you communicate with a horse without a rider, with a horse on a lead line or completely at liberty, which is nothing attaching you to the horse. And it was extraordinary.
That's one of the things that's so exciting about this work is that this isn't really about a human getting onto the horse and riding the horse, but this idea of being at liberty on the ground with the horse, that really does allow this herd connection in terms of behavior. We have a clip of you dancing with
Roxy.
With Roxy, and I'm wondering if we can just take a quick look at that. So
sure.
Great to hear us talk about it, but let's see you actually moving with the horse. I've seen that clip now, I think 10 times, and every time I watch it, I'm just delighted. Can you talk a little bit about, there was two moments. There's a moment where you have the carrot stick with you, the crop, and then it cuts to where you're just with your hands and body.
Yep.
Talk about that, the techniques going on there.
Yeah, I'm very pleased you mentioned that. So the crop is not is simply there to extend my reach by about 12 feet, so I can gently just tap Roxy on the haunches to cue her. And I barely even needed that. It was just my energy. That little high stepping thing that I do, she loves it. I was just at the barn yesterday, and the minute I lapse into that, her ears come forward and she goes, yes, let's do that dance. Horses are very smart. Yeah. They will remember movement. And there's a lot of stuff going on in this film that requires a merging of improvisation and horsemanship technique. If I pull my shoulder in this way, I'm pulling Roxy closer to me. And if I take my gaze and send it out into this space, I'm cueing her to move away from my shoulder. And very important, Roxy loves dancing inches from me, which I love as well. But it's a little form of domination where she's beginning to take over completely. And then the dialogue, the human equine dialogue, gets a little muddy because I'm not in a position to ask her anymore. I should point out, Carl, that this is improvised, but it's based on different skills that we've practiced.
Right, and one of the things, for us, it's great to hear you explain that with words, but you've never had a conversation with Roxy in terms of, a verbal conversation. So can you talk a little bit about why you're talking about these zones and the pressure that you use? What is Roxy responding to instinctively when you're using the zones on her body and such?
Right. I should say that during COVID, we've all become very aware of the size of our personal bubble, and how we use that spatial bubble is exactly how horses communicate with one another in the herd. So if they intrude on a bubble, they'll be asked spatially by their herd mate to move. You can invite them into your bubble in different ways, energetically, or you can expand your bubble and expect the horse to respect that request. So, by the way, the difference between demanding and requesting is huge. Right. If you really want a partnership with this animal, you have to learn how to ask and not demand. Right. Otherwise, you're dominating them.
So that kind of gets at the question Pamela just wrote. In this collaboration, do you see yourselves as equal partners?
I'm definitely aiming for that. I'm listening. I'm picking up on what Roxy is offering me. When she comes up to me face on, I go, oh, you want to be right here. How about if I go and touch you? And what if I stroke along your body and then get behind you? She can feel me back there. Her ears are back listening and watching me. And then I can cue her by starting to change the shaping of my body. She responds to that and turns around and comes to me. It's really a conversation. It's a huge conversation.
But it's that physical conversation. And,
yes.
and is that also, you use this wonderful term, animal listening. How does that connect with this idea of the physical listening?
I think that animals, we underestimate their intelligence dramatically. And I think that they are paying attention to us, but most of the time we treat them like objects instead of treating them like other sentient beings with enormous intelligence. And this is one of the things that drew me to this work was I wanted to be accountable to the larger world, that I wanted my work to interface with nature, with a world larger than just our human-centric self-concerns. And I know this is part of what you're interested in about this work.
Yeah, I think maybe we should move to that idea of how for you has this work allowed you to decenter the human experience. As a dance artist and choreographer, our medium is our body and other people's bodies so often,
Right.
and we become incredibly myopic sometimes. And with working with you, as we have as in collaboration, the horses just push you out of that space.
Yes.
What has that done for you in terms of just how you experience the world in your art?
I'm sorry to.
It's
we're
okay.
jumping on each other. The technology of COVID. I think that humans make assumptions about how we know things in this world, and we organize them in our thinking brain. The horse doesn't do that. It organizes itself in its sentient brain. And by the way, both you and I are parents. We know that our young children had tremendous sentient intelligence, which gradually shuts down as we go through our education system and our socializing process.
Right.
And part of what this work does is say, wait, you, and now specifically a dancer, has enormous physical intelligence. Let's learn how to use more of it. But you have to be respectful and humble. And there's the humility portion of it that's particularly interesting to me. Don't assume that the way that I organize choreography is going to be interesting to this horse. By the way, you and I both know that horses will memorize, if you rehearse something over and over again the same way, horses will memorize the sequence and they will skip to the end.
Right.
And just to be done sooner, because it's just easier, then they can go back to grazing. It's not that they're lazy, but they prefer to stand still.
But they're efficient. They're
very efficient.
I mean, I love this idea that we have so much knowledge and awareness early on in our life, and a lot of our socialization and education kind of squeezes these natural reflexes and instincts out. I actually just had this wonderful connection. I've never asked someone to join my company without literally seeing them as an animal in my mind.
Yeah.
And it just that because when I can see a mover who's just so naturally engaged with their instinctive self, they're incredibly compelling.
Yeah.
How has, but again, one of the challenges that we have when we've worked with horses is a lot of times people like to anthropomorphize the animal and make them human and think that they're operating the way we think we're operating. How have you dealt with that kind of lack of direct communication, even though there is still direct communication, but there's not this verbal comprehension?
Well, for one thing, horses are prey animals and we're predators.
Right.
We will go to our predator side very easily. We've done that with the world at large. We've completely dominated our environment and just shaping it to serve our needs. Right. And Antarctica and the Arctic are melting. I feel that the humility and the deference to the power of nature is embedded inside this work in very important ways. And by the way, COVID is a huge reminder of that. Hello, no matter what, this entire world has now been trapped inside this pandemic. We have to pay attention differently, and the horses do that for us.
It is, I as I was prepping for this, I just thought there was so much landscape for us to cover, and I'm just realizing this idea of how the horse work. It sends me back to our 5-year collaboration that we had that led to this piece called Unstable Landscapes, and I realized during that whole time, humility, really decentering my choreographic process so that we were having an equality with the horses, we were having an equality with our two companies coming together. It pushes you out of this me-centric space and into this very much of almost a collective mind.
Right.
And is that something that you've experienced inside of this?
Oh, huge. My company has to operate as a collective mind at times. You and I made a piece on a hillside for our in 2011 for the Bates Dance Festival, and the piece literally covered an entire hillside, a huge rock, a near pasture, and then the immediate paddock. And at times the dancers were spread out over this enormous geography, needing to think as one mind. And it was really beautiful how we orchestrated a cast of our 10 dancers and then 14 other dancers from the Base Dance Festival who worked with us. You get people to understand that thinking collectively, I always think of murmuration, you know, how birds work inside flocks. That sense of really feeling each other is a hugely important part. I do want to mention that the very end of the piece that we made together called Unstable Landscape involved all 10 dancers and 3 horses running up a hillside together. Right. And that meant opening the paddock gates. And we had an equine advisor working with us, and she said, that is going to be fabulous. Don't ever actually do it, because if the horses know that you're going to open that gate and let them leave, they will spend the whole piece standing by that gate waiting, because they've already learned that part of the piece. So one of the complexities of that collaboration that was incredible is we had our 2 companies. We had an equine expert, and then we had a small horse herd coming together, and all of these elements, you know, we had to stop saying to ourselves, this is our process, this is what it's going to look like, because the horses and then our advisor also had information that we had to respond to as well, right? Right. We needed to, in other words, what we're doing with the horses is orchestrating their behavior. So there's a chat question, do they need to be trained? They need to understand the human behavior that's going to make a gentle ask of them. Yep. So the finale, you and I wanted all the horses, the 3 bays, and the dancers to be running together in a huge circle. And we needed to get the horses to understand the direction of the movement and how the dancers were going to be interfacing inside of that. Now, they know how to trot and canter. Right. They had to learn which dancers were going to be directing them, and which dancers were going to be just part of their herd. And we had 2 different teams. And going back to Dave's question as well, it's Dave, we're in this work. We're trying not to make them do things, but we're actually trying to meet them on their instinctive responses to the world. Is that thing interesting to me? Am I going to go that way? So you're it's really this active listening session. So it does, yes, training is a part of it, and you have to, you know, actually in many ways you have to learn how to quiet yourself as a person and be very responsive, but it doesn't necessarily require years and years of training, although your video with oh yes it does, Carl. I got to tell you, this particular work with what that we're doing now, I can't tell you how complicated it is. Right. Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I don't mean like the training, like the work you did to move with Roxy the way you did. That's just hours and hours and days of work. But with my company, we were able to come and learn from you and actually get involved in some of this work sensitively fairly quickly because of the pathways that your research has done. We also chose, the dancers who were part of the pack. I intuitively decided these are the 4 dancers that can do that, and then the other 4 dancers will be better suited to directing them. Yeah. So in a way, you're basing it on the personality and instincts of the humans, what they're better suited to do. And sorry, I'm getting sidetracked a little bit. I do want to mention one of the projects we have in the works now is we're going to imprint our dancers on newborn foals right after they're born, and then spending months and probably years exploring how we can engage with their natural instincts and with the mothers. So Roxy, by the way, is one of the pregnant mares, and we've been dancing with her since before she became pregnant, and we'll be there for the birth of her baby. And then we're shooting a documentary film about this process. Should be really fun. Really film that whole imprinting process, which is the beginning of it. Yes. It seems to me like something that we'll need to have another conversation about Oh, I'd love to. In a year or so. Yeah. You know, let's actually take a moment. We've talked a lot about unstable landscape. I've got a surprise guest to join us today, but Black Label mover Patrick
is here to join us, and there he is. Hi, Patrick.
Hey, how you doing, guys?
So, Patrick, you were one of the movers in Unstable Landscape, and we'd like you to. We're only going to show this piece was almost 30 minutes long. We're only going to show about a minute of it, but why don't you give it a quick intro?
Yeah, so I was one of the people guiding the horses, which really interested me because I had grown up around horses, but they were always kind of in the background, or they were never really attainable to me. And so being able to work with the horses and lead them was a really great experience for me. So take a look at what we had going on.
Awesome. Yeah, there we go. Great, thank you. So, Patrick, do you want to talk a little bit about there? You are not the human moving with the horses. You're actually in the center of that, the taller figure.
Yes.
And then we'll have Joe talk a little bit about what we just saw. But what were you doing in the middle there?
So myself and the other three movers, leaders of the horses, we had things called carrot sticks, which is a long stick, and then it has a rope on the end that is called a whip, but it's never used to really hit the horse. And what we're doing is we're moving them around. We're directing our energy kind of behind them and then opening up the space to where we want them to go. So we had them do a couple of revolutions, and then at one point we did end up actually turning them to go the other way. And so then we would actually start blocking their energy and have them turn around. So that's kind of how we directed them as a group from the inside.
Phenomenal. Joe, talk about that moment when those three horses come up on Eddie. I mean, that such an incredible, he's spinning and doing all of this, and they're actually coming at him quite fast. It's kind of a moment like, what's going to happen here? Can you talk a little bit about, what you see when you see that encounter?
Well, the dancer that was in the dust and the horses come right up to Eddie and then stop. Eddie, I think they perceived as part of their herd. And if you notice after the pause, Eddie walks away and the horses follow him. Yeah. So the people who are directing the horses are actually standing relatively still and sending energy, as Patrick said, behind their haunches. They're driving them. Eddie, on the other hand, has been running with them and is part of their herd. So we're delineating two different human roles. I don't know if that's answering your question, but
it absolutely does. I mean, I think this interesting thing, one of the things I think we as movers really learned in this horse work is, as you just said, as soon as the horse acts in response to the information you give, you don't keep pushing. You have to let your energy go. So it's also this kind of bringing up energy and bringing it down, and so that they aren't confused that now you're sending more information, or why do you keep giving us?
Well, you don't want to be chasing them. You want to ask them to move and then trust that they will take the responsibility upon themselves. So in a way, you're empowering them. So that Patrick and his crew of three other dancers were doing the sending, and Eddie and the other dancers were actually part of the herd, and it was two different roles. And if you can think about the intelligence it takes for those animals to not make assumptions about all the humans, by the way, but be able to delineate between those two roles, they're better than we are as humans at doing that, by the way.
Well,
it's pretty humbling to realize that we could have those two specific roles performed by humans, but the horses didn't generalize and say all humans are predators chasing us.
Right. Yeah.
Well, that's important.
No,
humans do a lot of assumptions and a lot of generalizing.
Well, and it, like, we talked a lot in this experience about how we, Patrick, one of the things that we talked a lot about as we were learning from Jo and the equine expert and the horses is talk about how kind of letting go was an experience for you, because we so often want to make them do things. What was that experience for you?
Carl, can I just say that before Patrick talks about that, in horsemanship, they say it's the release that teaches. So the ask, which is energetic, is followed by a, that's as much as I need to ask you. It's a release.
Right.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's really interesting to kind of shed everything away from yourself. And there was this one moment where we had done the rehearsal process for the day, and oftentimes I would go with the horses at the end of the rehearsal, and I would just pet them and love on them, as many of the dancers would. And other dancers were like, all right, Patrick, we should probably get going soon. I was like 5 more minutes, guys. And so I was sitting in there, and all of a sudden I felt this shift. I was like, okay, something's within these 3 horses just got really strange. I don't know what they're telling me, but I need to leave immediately. And so I did, and within 10 seconds, the head horse, I forget what they're called, matriarch, she nipped at one of them, and they all went running. And so I was 10 seconds away from being trampled. I don't think they would have done it had I still been in there. But they told me with their energy, it's time that we're done. We're done with this, and you need to go. So being able to tune in to them, it takes time. But once you do it, it's just, I don't know, it's freeing.
Yeah, it's precious work. So Jo, it's so amazing how quickly all this time can fly back past us here. I'd like to just ask you, kind of one more question, bringing it back to our responding to the zombie apocalypse. We've been in an amazing era of the COVID pandemic, massive climate change that you've alluded to, significant political turmoil, and then this, the challenge of all these processes of zombification that we're experiencing. How, maybe just respond to how you think this work can help us approach and deal and respond to these kind of major challenges that we are experiencing as humans right now.
I think we have to become much better listeners, and it's not just oral listening, which means, for me, it meant fold your hands, be quiet. This is not about you. Really pay attention. Pay attention to the bigger picture and not just the little tunnel that you're in.
I love that. So, I mean, this is one of the things that we also talk about in all of these climactic changes, and the idea that if there were zombies coming at us, what, the idea, the thing is to immediately say, I've got to survive, versus kind of opening your focus and trying to understand how did we get here. And I think that there is this contemplative nature about working with animals that goes broader than the specific moment of trying to have this relationship with them. And I love that idea of listening with every sense, right?
Yeah. It's not as goal-oriented also. We as humans are very goal-oriented. We're going to make things happen. And there's a lot more allowing. But I have to say it's not passive. A lot of our somatic practice as humans is about deep internal investigation. And this is a kind of somatic practice that's about always connecting and paying attention, but not on the alert for how we can make it change. It's a kind of active listening that is very intelligent in a different way than our goal-oriented intelligence.
I think we can leave it with that. I can't thank you enough, Jo, for taking the time to share just a sliver of this work. And I hope our audience can quickly see that we could have multiple discussions on all of the levels of this work, because there's so much depth and other learning that we could grab a hold of. So thank you again for joining us today, Patrick and Jo. And to our audience, please come back next month for our 4th episode of Unreal World. For now, see you later.
crazy, but it seems so logical. I can't deny that there is something supernatural with you. Makes me act the